The BeastNet Canadian Edition podcast is proudly brought to you by
Grit Farm Fitness. Here we discuss all things obstacle course racing related, as well as
endurance, conditioning, running, rucking, and much more.
Welcome to the BeastNet Canadian Edition.
All right, today on BeastNet International Canada Edition, we've got returning race director with Spartan Canada, Dr. Johnny Waite.
Honorary doctor. Joe gave me that years ago. I appreciate that.
Before we even go into it, so what is that part about?
Oh,
How did you get that?
So my other role in Spartan, I do the podcast, obviously Spartan Up. So I spend a lot of time with Joe. And there's lots of times, this is a very frustrating, crazy business. There's lots of times where he's just pulling his hair out. And after we talk, he always says, "You're like a psychologist." And so he started calling me the doctor. And so Dr. Johnny sort of started to stick within Spartan circles. And it's fun. It drives my daughter crazy because she has more education than I do, and I'm a doctor. So it's all good.
She's got a little bit of catching up to do.
Yeah.
So
it's really good to us. Yeah, it's really good to be back. I did a 3-year stint with Spartan 2012 to 2015 in quality management, where I was traveling around the world, making sure that all the races were, as one of all these new countries, that we're maintaining a standard, based on where the US was at. I took 2016 off, got dragged back into Spartan in 2017 for 3 years. And that seems to be the cycle now, that I do 3 years, take a year off, and then always get reeled back in. And this time it was just that at the end of the last licensee's term, at the end of 2019, I decided I wasn't going to race direct in 2020. And the administration of Spartan came back into the US. So there's not a separate licensee in Canada like there used to be. We're basically an area managed out of the States, but we have local people on the ground. And with no races in 2020 and obviously some rebuilding to do this year in terms of getting things up and running again in COVID times, they approached me to come back just to have a steady hand at the helm of operations. So yeah, I'm excited. Nick Bertrand is back as the build director, which is awesome. He's such a solid dude, and knowing that he's there is going to make my life much easier. And then we're really hiring a great staff as far as festival management and volunteer coordination and build team and all those other things that go along with it. So I'm actually very optimistic about the season, but there are some changes that have to be sort of addressed head on. And I wanted to reach out to some people like yourself who have a reach in the community to get a chance to address some things that we do have to deal with. Like, for example, there are some schedule changes. There's some exciting things too. Like there are new obstacles coming. I've got a list of some of the new ones we can expect in Canada, because we've been promising that for a while, that you're going to get all the newest and best experiences. And then also to kind of put out a bit of an advance plea to people on the volunteer front, because that's going to be a huge issue this year. We're going to be limited with the number of people we can have at some of the venues. So, some of them will have more spectators allowed than others and things like that. But we really need volunteers at the races, as you know. I mean, for water stations and just making everything run smoothly. And in the States, they have a tremendous culture built up around that, with hundreds of volunteers each race. And, we're sort of scrambling to get them in the dozens. And this year, I think in particular, it's going to be harder with people not being, unless you're a hardcore racer, people may not be quite as quick to go out to events. So yeah, so I just want to lay the groundwork for that. But the first and foremost thing is that Spartan Race is back 2021. We are going to be holding races. We've reached out to all of our venue partners to get a sense of how they feel it's going to be as far as getting approvals in their jurisdictions. And based on that, we have had to cancel some races. There are the first 2 races of the year, which were in May, aren't going to happen. Those are the ones in Ottawa and in Montreal. And I don't think there's been a public announcement yet, but there has been an email go out to racers who were registered for those races to say, hey, this is going to be canceled. Here are your options as far as rescheduling and things like that, deferring your credit. But that was we just know that where Canada's at on the curve as far as vaccinations and things like that, neither of those venues was confident that we were going to get permission for a mass participation event, nor were we. And we need a lot of lead time, obviously, to do the planning. So those ones got canceled. And that's led to a couple other changes in the season, because our first scheduled race now is Toronto at Brimacombe, a familiar venue. which we're excited about. It's a great venue. It's a great market. For a new build crew, it's a fairly easy place to build, so we can get them up to speed and they can sort of learn what we're doing.
Yeah.
And then we go from there out to Golden as scheduled for the middle of July. And really excited about that venue. We'll talk a little bit about sort of looking back on some of our old venues, Sun Peaks and Kimberley and some of the real um, sufferfests that we used to have. And obviously Spartan, as it's evolved into more of a sport away from just that lifetime experience of getting through something. Uh, we're not seeing as many of those events that are really, really transcendently difficult because, we want to make them accessible for people. Kicking Horse is going to be a venue that it's pretty impossible to flatten that. It's going to be a big challenge, but we're excited about it. Really excited. That's going to be our big mountain race this year. And then we go to Red Deer for the middle of August. And Red Deer is such a dynamite venue at Heritage Ranch. People love it. We've been going back there for years. And every year we put out our survey, what people like and don't like. And every year I think, well, maybe we won't be back at Heritage Ranch next year because we've been so many times. But the what's the word I'm looking for? What's it called when you get feedback? The feedback on that
Yeah.
is off the charts. Like people just love that. It's got such a great festival. It's got such great terrain. There's the water. There's everything there, and it's so well positioned between Calgary and Edmonton, so that we can draw on both those populations. So those three events are untouched. The one that's going to change is we were originally scheduled to be in Whistler in September, and because we've canceled the races in May in Quebec and Ottawa, just on the edge of Quebec, we really have to find a spot for Quebec race. We can't not have a race in Quebec. I mean, that was our core market originally. It's been one of our top two markets for years, between that and Alberta, as far as the loyalty of racers. So we have to make sure that we get back for a race in Quebec. So the Whistler event isn't going to happen because we're going to need to bring everything back to Quebec to put on a Quebec
That
race.
makes me sad because that's my hometown.
Absolutely, yeah. I used
I will be
to
traveling if I
I
can.
used to live in Whistler, had a home in Squamish. I mean, I was so excited about getting out there. Um, and we will be back at some point as well. But one big thing to consider is that in the past years, because of Canada's geography, we had two trailer sets, one for the west, one for the east, because you just couldn't get them back and forth quickly enough to get on all the races that we're putting on. That really limited our ability to bring you all the obstacles because we can't afford two of every obstacle when they're being amortized across 3 or 4 races each. In the States, they'll have an obstacle set that's going to 15, 16 races, and they can justify it. So we really had to get down to one trailer set. So we used to carry 3 trailers. We had 3 in the east, 3 in the west, so 6 trailers. Now we're having 6 trailers at every event. So, that's going to bring more festival elements. It's going to bring more obstacles. It's going to bring all the things that people in Canada have in the past said, I really wish we had those things. We do have them, but we have one set that's going to be going back and forth across the country. So we're starting in
Going to
Ontario.
spread it out a bit more, but you're going to
Yeah.
get that much more out of it.
So we're starting in Ontario. We're going out to British Columbia and Alberta. We're coming back to Quebec for a race October 2nd. We're still working on the venue, but we're going to have a venue somewhere near Montreal, hopefully on the Ottawa side. That's going to be early October. And then we have October 23rd at Blue Mountain, Collingwood, Ontario. And that really is such a marquee venue. It's like a little Tahoe. It's going to be absolutely fantastic. But we really want to make sure we had the coverage in our markets. So we've got BC, Alberta, Ontario, Quebec. Those have been our key markets. Obviously, someday we'd love to go to the Maritimes. We'd love to have one of the Prairie provinces. We've tried many times to figure out how to make that work, and it just hasn't.
Yeah.
But yeah, this way we get our coverage. And then the last thing to mention is that we aren't going to have the winter race. And we talked about a winter race later in November in Quebec. The reason for that is we are going to take a beating on all these races. No matter what we do, there's going to be money lost on every race because a lot of the people registering, it's not new money, it's credits that they paid last year that obviously went to keep the company from dying. So we managed to keep the company alive. So we have to produce the same events that we've always produced without as much incoming fresh cash because a lot of these are credits deferred from last year. So we've really had to focus on our core product, and that winter race, it was an expansion product. It was the first time we were going to do it in Canada. We knew it wasn't going to get the same traction as a summer race, but we wanted to sort of put our flag in the ground that this is somewhere that we're going. And we realized that for 2020, our objective is to get you guys racing, period. We want to get you out. We want to get you having fun. We want to get you re-engaged. Everyone's been very patient waiting for this all to happen. It's our number one priority. And to do that, we said, okay, what's the core product we can deliver and really focus on that. That said, we're also looking toward 2022 and saying, awesome, let's get through this year. Let's have a successful year. Let's get the Canadians rewarded for their loyalty and their passion, and then go into 2022 and put on the best year ever. I mean, we've got a returning team that will be that we well established by then. We've gotten through the hardest obstacle anyone's ever had with COVID, and then we're looking forward from there. And as you know, Spartan and Tough Mudder are pretty closely related right now. Whereas in the past, you used to sometimes have to choose between the events because they happen around the same time.
Or
Tough Mudder
yeah,
has one
on the
event.
same day.
Yeah, and I think at the beginning that was maybe a little intentional by the two companies because each was trying to establish dominance, right?
Yeah.
But now Spartan's mindset is we need other obstacle races. Like we need people to have the opportunity to go and do other things, and maybe that's where they'll get their taste of it. And and then they come over to the competitive side of the sport, which is Spartan. That's really where Spartan staked its ground, was that we were going to be the ones where you're timed, where you're ranked, where you're compared to other people around the world, where you can go back to race the next year and see how you did compared to how you did the year before.
Yeah.
Whereas Tough Mudder was more of an experience. Other than World's Toughest Mudder, it wasn't timed. You'd go and do a Tough Mudder in the early days, and it was just get through it and help your friends through it and everything else. So there's a lot of room for all the experiences. The mud runs, fantastic. If somebody's not feeling competitive and feels up to a Spartan, but a mud run's going to get them off the couch, we want those to continue and keep happening. So we're actually in the business of supporting them, trying to make sure that our schedule doesn't conflict with them. So just I wanted to mention that Tough Mudder is only going to have one event in Canada this year because they're in the same boat where they're sort of rebooting. They're going to have a Toronto event in September.
Yeah.
And then so really that's the Toronto event in September allows racers who want to go to that September 18th still get to our October 2nd race in Quebec, and then get to Blue Mountain in late October. So the tail end of the year is actually going to be a very exciting time for OCR in Eastern Canada, and then we've got our summer out in the West. Sorry, that was quite a soliloquy.
When can people like me expect to see these dates on the website?
Yeah, that's happening within the next week or so. They really wanted to get the email announcement out to people who had registered. So anyone who's already pre-registered for those events, they want to make sure that they weren't hearing it, word of mouth, secondhand, and therefore they address that in an email specifically to them. And otherwise I'd be waiting until it was up on the websites before I started talking about it to someone like yourself, who can blast it out there to the world. But I know people are already going to be talking about it, because if somebody got an email, they're going to call their friends and say, hey, did you get that email? And word spreads fast. So
yeah, it does. As soon as you get it, it's like, forward it to everyone I know.
yeah. So my thinking is, over the years, we've done some great things, and every now and then there's a misstep. And it's always best to take it on the chin, to address it head on. Like, for example, a couple of years ago at Kimberley, our first year there, we ran into weather, like the hottest day we could have imagined, way beyond what was predicted. It caused water issues. It caused volunteer issues where volunteers weren't showing up. And after that one, I immediately tried to get in front of people like this and say, hey, we could have done some things better there. So let's get some feedback. And so on something like this with a scheduling change, I just don't want people to be making all kinds of assumptions. Oh, it's because of this or because of that. It really is simply that we can't have those early ones because of COVID.
Yeah.
We have to have a Quebec race. We can't not have a Quebec race. We already have two in Western Canada, so that's why the Whistler one's moving to Quebec. And the only reason we're not having the winter race is because by then, with all the extra work we have to do with COVID protocols, as far as extra volunteer management at obstacles, if we're not going to have volunteers, it's going to be extra staff management at obstacles, making sure people are following all the protocols, making sure things are wiped down. There's a lot more to happen. And so it's going to be a very exhausting season. And so the idea is by the end of our core season, rather than then saying, now let's try a winter race for the first time, we're gonna bump that to next year.
Do you know
so,
how? Sorry. Do
no,
you
go,
know
no, go ahead.
how the events, like the actual like areas, are going to work with the spectators? Because I've seen a
Yes,
lot of questions online, like, are they allowing spectators? How's
great
that going
question.
to look?
So Jacksonville, they just had the first race. So the last three Spartan races have been in Jacksonville because it was the last one they had before the world shut down. It was the one they threw on in May because it was the only place to get permission. And then they've gone back there for their first race to kick off 2021 because they know they can do it successfully. They've done it successfully there.
Yeah, and it
But
did very well.
it did. It went really
Read a
well.
lot of reviews
But they
and
did.
team videos and so forth, and it was a great turnout from what I heard.
Exactly. Yeah, and they did everything right. Like they really did. But they didn't have spectators. They didn't have kids because they're really just trying to limit the variables for now and make everything run smoothly. The plan is wherever allowed to have spectators and have kids.
Okay.
It's such an important part for us. You know, that whole
Have the kids race or kids as spectators?
kids race.
Kids.
That's the plan. You know, in a perfect world, we want to put on the product that we put on, which includes spectators, includes the whole festival element, includes kids races. A, because that's the future of the sport, getting the kids involved. B, because families love to come with the kids, and it's just what we want to do. It's the right thing to do. And that said, we have to follow guidelines. And
Yeah.
not only do we have to follow the guidelines where we're at, like say, for example, in Florida, there were some people saying, hey, you know, I don't think we have to wear masks in Florida. Why are we wearing masks? And the answer was because we also want to put this race on in Massachusetts, and we want to put it on in California, and we want to put it on in Montana, and we want to put it on in Europe. And we need to show people that we're following the strictest
Yeah,
protocol.
even if you don't have to do it, so that when you reach out to those people, they're like, "Hey, you guys went above and beyond, so you know what?
Absolutely.
We're willing to host you for that."
Yeah, and
Like,
different people have different opinions, which I totally appreciate and understand. I've already had some people saying, you're not going to do that stupid mask thing or blah, blah, blah. And you know what, guys? Like, A, most places have the rules that we have to.
yeah,
And B, we want to get as many people racing in as many places as soon as we can safely. And even if you don't think that that's necessary to be safe, it is necessary for us to get the permission to get you out there. So,
yeah,
so we're going to err on the side of caution always on these things. And I do think most of this season is going to be impacted by this. Even once people are vaccinated, I think there's still going to be some requirements for masks and things like that for this year. And obviously, when we can get to high fiving and eating hot dogs and doing all the things that we like to do, but you
fucking
know,
nuts.
but right now, you know, there's social distancing, there's masks, and um, uh, with the kids race. The challenge is obviously the parents because on the adult race, you don't have a whole bunch of kids running alongside them. On the
Yeah,
kids race, you know, you have parents all huddled around the start line, huddled around the finish line, running along the side. So we're just trying to figure out how to make that all work. At the end of the day, our goal is the same as your goal. Our goal is to have the full blown events with all the bells and whistles. And but we also are responsible for delivering it safely and delivering it in a way that will cause other jurisdictions to look at us and say, yes, I want them to have an event where I'm at, as opposed to taking every liberty we're allowed to and then have somewhere else say, well, clearly we don't want them to be here if that's what it's going to be like.
yeah.
Yeah.
You
So
mentioned volunteers a couple times.
yeah.
So where are people going to be able to find that? Is it still going to be on the website
Yep.
with the listings for the ones? And I'm sure most people know, but can you remind us what you get for volunteering? Like,
Yeah,
why would
absolutely.
I want to come out and volunteer for a Spartan race?
For sure. So there's a couple of things. First of all, you know, there's on the website there's a place to register and say I want to be a volunteer. We're going to be promoting it through social media, Facebook, Instagram, things like that, saying, hey, you want to volunteer? Here's the link. Um, Two things. One, you get a free race. Two, you get your volunteer T-shirt and your lunch and things like that. But I want to tell a story about years ago. I was down in Temecula, California, 2013, and it was 5 o'clock in the morning on race day, and I arrived and I saw this huge lineup of volunteers, and I looked at them and I said, "That's interesting. They must all be here for the free race." But then I got talking to them and I realized, there's all shapes and sizes and ages, and most of them weren't there to race. Most of them were there because this was a cool thing that they wanted to be part of. And and that's why I think it's so important to really honor and include volunteers. It's not just here's your t-shirt, stand over there, now go work that obstacle. It's hey, thank you so much for being here. You're part of the Spartan family, and treat them that way.
Yeah,
Because a big part of the reason people come, a lot of people who are there are, yes, they're taking their credit, but they're giving it to a family member. So maybe your son races and you want to be there to be part of it, and you're going to let him use your credits. That's fantastic. So we have lots of mums and dads and whatnot volunteering, and spouses, and I really think that that's where the key is going to be this year. Especially, say we have somewhere and we're told we can have up to 2,000 people total, right? That's racers, staff, everything. And if we're in a situation like that, we say, okay, well then we really can't have half of that taken up by spectators.
Yeah.
But somebody says, well, I want to be at the event. My son's at the event. My wife's at the event. My husband, great, volunteer, because volunteers are going to be allowed at the event. So you can come together, you can hang out together. Yes, you're going to be on part of the course for part of the time and not necessarily waiting for them at the finish line, but it's a way to be involved and be included. And then um, in markets like, say, a Toronto or a Montreal or a Red Deer, where we have very well-established race communities, there are a lot of people who um, they're coming to volunteer on the one day to race on the other day, for example, which is awesome.
Yeah.
But somewhere like Golden, BC, it's much more challenging because anyone who's traveling is traveling a distance. So especially, so say we have a trifecta in Golden, which we do, and somebody's coming, they're planning to do all three distances. Well, clearly they're not going to volunteer on any of those days. And so and Golden is not a big town, so it's not like we've got millions of people to draw on. So of course we're going to go to the service clubs and the sports clubs and the venue itself and ask if they have any off-season staff they can recommend, things like that. But it really is important for people to bring friends. So if you're coming to the race and you've got a couple of friends who say, man, I'm not going to do the race, but I'd love to see what that thing is that you do. Awesome. Get them to sign up for volunteer. Then they've got their registration for the next race, so they can go to Red Deer and do it. And
they can give it to you, and you can go to the next one for free too. It's the great thing about
100%.
those. So
Yeah. And so,
but I'd make them go.
Yeah, sure.
I'm that guy. It's like, no, you're gonna go do one. I don't care.
Yeah. And so volunteers are really key. We've never developed quite the culture in Canada around race volunteers that they have in the US. Like, for example, at SoCal, their problem is, what are we going to do with these 700 volunteers? How are we going to keep them all busy? We just don't have that problem. I'd love to have that problem. But I also recognize that part of it is making sure that volunteers are taken care of, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that the zone leaders are going around constantly, making sure they have water, making sure they get their pee breaks, making sure that they're not being abused by racers. It really is a fun day out there, when things go right. And so we need to make sure it goes right for them. So I would say to racers, you can be a big part of the solution by putting your thinking cap on and thinking, hey, who do I know who I can get involved on a volunteer level? What friends, family, prospective racers could I say, hey, why don't you come volunteer, see what it's all about, and get them to register.
Yeah, you might even see me run by while I'm doing the race and get to,
Absolutely.
egg me on or whatever, right?
Yeah,
So
I can pretty much guarantee it. If somebody's going to work at an obstacle, I guarantee they'll see you at some point. So
if they don't, then there's a problem.
that's right. Exactly. Yeah.
But,
Hey,
or they're just so busy.
speaking of obstacles, I also wanted to mention that we do have some new obstacles this year.
Yeah.
And anyone
what
who's raced in the States will have seen most of these, and anyone who hasn't raced in the States won't even necessarily know what they are. So 6 brand new obstacles and one that's a variation. So we've always had the vertical cargo net, but now it's the vertical cargo net with a platform where you climb, step, climb, over, down, and it just breaks things up a little bit. So you're not just going straight up, straight down. Like it's a little more of an interesting challenge. But then we've got the twister, and everyone knows the twister from the States, right? The twister is where the monkey bars spin. But we've got the helix as well, and the helix is it's going this way spinning. Or sorry, the beater. So you're grabbing it.
Beater, yes. Yeah.
And it's spinning this way, and you're going across, or vice versa. I just mix up the twister and the beater. We've got the helix, which is a little bit like the Z-walls, but with a lot more twisting and turning and angling. We've got the pipe layer, and the pipe layer is you go through, and it's essentially like scaffolding, but there's all different levels. So you've got to contort, twist, climb over, slide under, spin around, and and then the other one called the box, and I'm not going to show you the box. I'm going to leave that as a surprise. But the
I
idea
I
being
think a lot of people know that one potentially, but
sure, yeah, exactly.
I'll
But,
leave it there. Got to
but
leave
but
something to the imagination and to find and to get out and go see. So
sure, exactly. But the idea is that you know, that is six. It's basically, if we're comparing it to say a super, for example, it's a quarter of the obstacles are new obstacles, and that's going to be exciting. It's not the same old race that you've always done. It is in the best ways, but we're bringing in new elements. And then the other part of it is in terms of the festival. Obviously, the festival is a huge part of this, and we're trying to ramp that up. So, for example, in the U.S., they've always had a separate start line MC and separate DJ. In Canada, we didn't have that. We were sort of juggling those two things. This year, it's going to be interesting to see what we can do with the festival. Like I know that in Jacksonville, they had to get people in and out as fast as they could to be under their number requirements. So if you ran an 8 a.m. heat and you finished at 10, you were gone by 11, which is the exact opposite of what we usually want, which is we want you hanging around by the refreshments and high-fiving and talking to your friends and cheering them on and cheering that last racer across the finish line. Those are all big elements of what we do. In a perfect world, we'll be able to do that. So I promise it'll be a great festival. It's going to have all the elements that maybe we've missed in the past, but it may not be as big a feature as we'd like it to be until later on in the season when the objective is to keep people there instead of having them come and go.
you've mentioned obstacles. What can we expect for obstacle density for the different
Sure.
distances? Do you guys have a number that you're wanting to stick for each one, or is it going to be more based upon the layout of the land?
Well, my objective has always been to have it varied, right? So they're not all jammed together. There's run obstacle, run obstacle. But we've also found over the last couple of years that there's something to be said for having a longer distance run and then hitting a bunch of obstacles where you're near the festival and people can watch it. And
Yeah, for
and
sure.
I love that. From a build standpoint, it makes things go quicker. But from the standpoint of the energy, for you to
Yeah,
go and run a K and then come back and hit two or three obstacles, then go run a K and then come back and hit two or three obstacles, and then some of the less exciting drags and things like that, that aren't as spectator friendly, we'll put out on part of the run. But the big things, the dynamic, high impact, high visual obstacles, the rope climbs and uh, Olympus, everything like that. It's nice to have those where people can see them. And part of that is sometimes you'll hit three obstacles in a row, bang, 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 and then head back out. But the numbers as it stands are still 20 for a sprint, 25 for super, 30 for a beast. And then an ultra beast is basically 62 because you have one that doubles,
yeah.
one extra one on each loop. The yeah, so that's the plan for the season. And again, one caveat that I put in everything is we are really watching what's happening at the races that are happening in the States, making sure that like for example, there's talk of not doing digs for some of the races, just because the idea about getting everyone wet and then they stand around, they're getting everything off them and it slows everyone down as they're getting in. You get the bunching up just before people get in. We want flow. So some obstacles we're looking at and saying, how can we, from a COVID standpoint, from a course management standpoint, so we're taking our cue from what's happening in the States, seeing how they're doing it.
Hmm.
So it is going to be a little bit of a fluid situation as we figure these things out. But as it stands, that's kind of what we can promise. But the great thing with this is that we're getting you racing, period.
Yeah,
Um, I've talked to so many people who have said, I don't care what we're doing, just get us out there doing something. And we're doing our best to get it to be the full experience that you're used to, and I really think it will be. But I have had a number of people say, dude, just get me out in the race course. That's all I want.
And now we're going to take a quick pause for a word from our sponsors.
We'll be right back, eh?
Do you like destination racing?
Are you looking for an endurance event where you can camp under the stars and be surrounded by nature and be with your friends?
Perhaps staying in an on-site cozy B&B is more your style.
Well, look no further.
Grip Farm Fitness has it all and more.
Located just 2 hours northeast of Vancouver in the beautiful Fraser Valley.
Participate in one of their events or just come out for hiking, horses, or much more.
Book any activity your heart desires at www.grit-farm.com.
That's www.grit-farm.com for our Canadian listeners, eh?
And now, let's get back to our regularly scheduled program.
Welcome back, eh?
Are you still pushing trail in Canada as
Yeah,
well?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So there's going to be trail. There's going to be hurricane heats at most of the events. The trail I'm really excited about. And some of the trail designs are awesome, where it's parts of the train that you just aren't going to see when you're running
The race.
the OCRs. Like for example, at Brimacombe, there's a beautiful forest all in behind that we haven't really used much. And Mark Rutherford, the manager there, said, "Why don't you run them through there?" And so the trail is going to be great. And the objective of the trail: use the start line, use the finish line, and then get them off the OCR course as fast as you can.
Yeah.
Just so that, it's not just they're paying to run the same thing again and not do obstacles. It actually is a very different experience. And yeah, trail has become a really big part of what Spartan does, and it's quite exciting. And I believe that as it stands, I don't think we have one scheduled at Golden because we're doing the whole trifecta there, but we do have one scheduled everywhere else. So yeah, it's going to be fantastic.
It's kind of hard to fit it in with a trifecta happening as well. It's not like
So
the
I'll tell
short
you
one
what
day, long one day, and fit the trail in on the
yeah.
first day. I've been to ones where there was trail on one day, trail on both days.
Yeah. Well,
The
we have
one
some
piece
night
of
trails on
feedback
Friday nights, which is great.
that'd be nice. Like
Yeah.
kind of during the hurricane time or whatever, right? Yeah.
Well, and one of the hardest things I've ever had to do as a race director was at Owl's Head a couple years ago. We did a trifecta weekend plus a kids race plus a hurricane heat plus an ultra plus a trail race. And we ran into weather where we had our first ever full blown Code Irene in Canada, where we had to actually shut the course down in the middle of the ultra. And yeah, after that weekend, I just put my head under a pillow for about 2 days because it was just so many moving parts and so hard to manage it all in those circumstances.
Logistics would be a nightmare, I'm sure.
Yeah, so obviously we want to bring you guys as much as we can, but we also want to make sure we deliver it in a quality way. So if there's a situation where it's just going to be too much, it's better to back off and focus on what we can do well rather than jam even more in. And I look, for example, like in the States, there's a whole bunch of beta stuff happening right now. Like DECA is taking off. It's the 10 stations, like almost like a CrossFit thing with some running in between. Really exciting. I know they've trialed Spartan Cross, which is almost like a short course kind of thing down in Jacksonville. Those are all being tested in the US and they're not planned to come to Canada this year, which I'm actually a little bit grateful for because we just want to get back to delivering the product well, and then we'll look at what we can add on to it, rather than throw as many moving parts as we possibly can this year.
The one piece of feedback I've got for you as a race director on the trail side was I've only done a few of them.
Yep.
There was one that we ended up getting to do the A-frame at the end.
Yep.
And I really enjoyed having at least one OCR aspect in the trail because I thought a lot of people maybe not a lot, but a portion of the people are coming just because it is a trail race. And they're like, I don't want to do a Spartan race, but kind of getting them to do one thing might just scratch that itch that's like, hey, you know what? That wasn't so bad.
Yeah.
And, they get to come there and see it. Like having it at noon was perfect because they'd get to kind of show up, see people doing sprint or whatever it was, and go, I thought it was going to be a lot worse. And then having to do one of them, like a nice, easier one, gets them their feet wet. And they're like, now I want to come and actually do one. So
I think the way that we've addressed that,
continue that, please.
Yeah, and I think the way we've addressed that in the past is like, for example, at Owl's Head, they did jump over the fire. That was a given, and they had the option of going over the wall. And so somebody who's like, a pure trail racer who doesn't want to do that obstacle doesn't have to. Jumping over the fire is just like jumping over a creek. That's like any other part of running. But yeah, I agree. It made it fun and interesting, and we can do that by bringing them back into that part of the course right before that.
Well,
So yeah, no, I
usually the
appreciate that.
A-frame is like the last thing just before the finish anyhow, pretty much, right? So
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So not always. I know some of our course designs, there are places that it isn't. But yeah, I think that's a great call, that where we can incorporate a little bit of that, it's a fun idea to do.
yeah, people may be like, oh, I just came for a trail race, but that's the thing. You can go around it,
Yeah,
like, and
for
then,
sure.
yeah, you're going to get people from both ends, but
Yeah.
given it an option, like I've heard people that are like, I'm not going to do that. And then they do it and they're like, oh, that wasn't so bad. Maybe I'll
Yeah.
come up to one of these and now I can stay and watch some more. Like just having it at the same time is really very useful, I think, anyhow.
Yeah,
So
for sure. And I've spoken to a number of trail race directors that I know personally in Ontario, out in Quebec, out in Alberta and British Columbia, who at first weren't quite sure what to think about Spartan, the idea about this 900-pound gorilla that comes into markets. But the idea is we're not putting on 20 trail races a year in Canada. We're putting on
yeah,
a handful, and really it's another opportunity for racers to get out and race, with a quality product. But hopefully it's also introducing some of our OCR racers to trail racing, who are now going to go and do a uh, one of the
miniature or something.
exactly, yeah, one of the established events. And again, what's good for us is good for them. What's good for them is good for us. We need more people running. We need more people off the couch. We need more people active. And we're finding that most of the really competitive Spartan racers now in the elite division are coming out of a trail racing background. It used to be people coming out of the gym who are trying to teach themselves how to run. There's a lot of ground cover between obstacles. So when you get these phenomenal runners showing up, like a John Elbin, who is already a very well established runner, and teach themselves how to do obstacles, it just grows the sport. And it's been awesome to watch. You watch Hunter McIntyre teaching himself how to be a faster runner, running a sub 3 hour marathon. And he's not that classic runner build. And then in Canada, obviously, we have so many great athletes in Canada. I'm not even going to start naming them because I'll
Because
name
then you're
8.
going to leave somebody out and you're
I'll
going to
name
feel
8 and leave
bad.
out 10. Yeah, yeah, but everyone knows who they are, who are top tier athletes are in Canada, and they are the best in the world, which is awesome. We consistently have 3 or 4 people at the top of the men, top of the women globally. This little country, and I think it bodes well for the whole sport, and they're great ambassadors too. I've had a chance to talk to a lot of them and reach out to them, and they reach out to me to see what's happening this season, and they're all excited, and they're just all top-notch people, which is really great.
Will there be a Canadian Spartan Pro team this year?
There will be a Canadian Spartan Pro team, and there will be a Canadian National Series. And I'm not at liberty to announce what those dates are. That will be announced soon. I know what they are, and they're great. And I'll give you a hint. They're nicely spaced out throughout the season, so they're not all at once. So that'll pretty much tell you what events they are. Yeah, Canada is going to be a focus where we're going to have our own national series, a proper one. We're going to have a pro team. Um, I'm not involved in those decisions, which I actually appreciate, especially because I know so many of the elite athletes personally, and I wouldn't want to be the one selecting people for the team. I'm operations. That's my job. My job is putting on quality events. There are other people in charge of choosing the pro team and making sure the marketing's done well and things like that. So, but yeah, I can say that I know for sure that is in fact the case.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So much to look forward to. I'm excited as heck.
Good.
Like even though you've canceled my race, but you know
Yeah,
what?
yeah.
Like, hey, whatever. I was expecting it. I'm both a Spartan and a Tough Mudder ambassador, so
Yep.
I've heard things coming down the pipe both ways.
Yep.
I knew Whistler was going to be canceled. They're still looking or sorry, not Spartan, but Tough Mudder's still looking for a replacement.
Yep.
Not this year, but who knows?
Exactly. Well, and that is really the idea. So much of what we're doing this year, and actually in a minute, I want to sort of talk about looking back a bit, because when you and I first chatted, we were going to talk about sort of the glory days of the sport. But when I
I
look
don't want to take
forward,
too much of your time here, but if I can reminisce as much as the next guy
that's
can.
cool. But looking forward and looking forward to 22 and beyond, 2022 and beyond, the idea is growth. And we want to provide more events. We want to be in more markets. We want to bring more people out. And that's both on the Spartan race and the Tough Mudder side, where, Tough Mudder used to be Toronto and Whistler, and I think they've had the occasional race in Quebec as well. The idea is, how do we get to 4 quality events in Canada on the Tough Mudder side? How do we get to 10 quality events in Canada on the Spartan race side? and really make sure that that in every market there's always a chance to do everything.
Yeah.
Right. That's the key. Is we want to make sure that you don't have to travel from British Columbia to Nova Scotia to do a beast. That we've got one in the east, we've got one in the west, and so looking forward, I'm excited about this year. I'm glad racers are excited, and it really is all a prelude to then being able to do everything we all want to do in 2022. But it's funny. You and I've talked about how the sport, and I say the sport intentionally, has really evolved.
Yeah.
There was a time when it was all about getting muddy, having a picture on your Facebook page, and people saying about that crazy thing that you did. Right. That was what mud runs were at the start.
That's what started me 5 years ago as well. Getting
Absolutely,
muddy.
and it's fantastic. It's great. Spartan Race has really established itself as the sport within the fun, and so
Mhm.
it's just as much fun. It's just as much everything, but it really is a sport. And because of that, like I was on a long call this morning about what are the variables that we need to even out. Like for example, the days of cutting logs are pretty much over, where they're all about 40 pounds. you know, to be a sport, you have to know that everyone's doing the same challenge because they're being timed and ranked against one another. So it was like, for example, looking at the tire flip and saying, how can we make sure that we place the tires in such a way that the one on that end isn't harder to pick up than the one on this end, that's in a
Yeah.
muddier place and that's on a harder bottom.
Hill. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, but the other side of that is, we reminisce about the Sufferfests, like Sun Peaks back in 2017.
Right
Exactly, you
there.
got that flag there. That's the survivor flag, right, from the Challenger climb,
Yeah.
or Kimberley the first year, when and people say, and it's funny, at the time I get a real mix of wow, that was awesome, and you're the worst person in the world, that was awful. Sometimes said tongue in cheek, and they're having fun. Sometimes actually.
I think people are going to enjoy being able to yell out your name again, and you
Thank you.
understand where I'm getting at. It won't,
Yeah, yeah,
oh, just
yeah. But the idea is that there really was a focus in the old days on that once in a lifetime experience. Once you can do this, you can do anything.
yep.
But because, on the one hand, you're trying to make it a sport where the elite athletes are being fairly tested. And that doesn't always involve, climbing straight up and down something that's awful. They want to run. And we want to bring new people into the sport who are maybe not up for that existential challenge.
Yeah.
And of course, is it going to be hard? For sure. Are you going to be tested? For sure. Are you going to curse me out sometimes? For sure. But I would say for the most part, it's not that races are easier. It's that we're focusing the difficulty differently. So the idea is, if you're finding it easy, then run, right? Try and go faster, try and get better at this rather than just surviving. And hopefully your first race, you are thinking, man, I just need to get to the end of this. But the next time it's, how can I get to the end of this faster? And there were a couple years where no matter what somebody did to train to show up, surviving Kimberley or surviving Stoneham in Eastern Canada were just nuts. The one race that will have elements of that this year, because I can't not, because of the venue, is Kicking Horse out of Golden. It's going to be really challenging. And I know Spartan has a helmet rating series that they're starting now, where it's like, this is brand new. It hasn't even been
Yeah.
officially
I've
like
never
nailed
heard of
down.
this. Please tell
But
us.
so for example, when we rate a course, we send the feedback down to the States and we say, this one is one helmet. So for example, Red Deer would be one helmet. It's challenging, but there's nowhere on there that you think, am I going to survive this? It's going to be an awesome race that you're going to get to the end. What would be a two helmet race? Something like Calabogie in Ottawa. Fair bit of elevation, fairly tough, but you're not running at altitude. You're not exhausted. You're not dealing with snowpack when you get up to the top, things like that. So
Yeah.
it's a more challenging race, but it's not going to break people. And then something like Golden, where you are at elevation, where it is a vertical mountain, that's going to have a 3 skull rating and be considered a Spartan max.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is all new to me as well. I'm just sort of thinking out loud as I tell you from what I've been listening to. But the idea is that will be one, sort of like you've got your Sun Peaks flag. people who are at that one will want to somehow put that on their wall to say, I was at that race. I survived that race out in Golden, BC. And as you know, they will. Like, I think, you know, I've talked with you on courses before. I've seen you in action, and I'm not about making somebody not finish. I want people to finish. You know,
You're the only reason I have that up there right now. You know, we can
Thanks.
get into that later, but
Yeah, but the idea is, do we make them difficult? Sure. You guys want us to make them difficult. Am I doing it to be a prick? Of course not. I want you guys to finish and to have something to be able to celebrate afterwards. So
yeah, for sure.
yeah. Yeah. So, but looking back, you know, I do think about some of the things that you guys survived as racers, some of the storms that people got through, some of the again, I keep going back to Challenger because I remember when I went out and scouted it, and I was like, that's crazy, and it took me forever to get up it, but I thought, well, you know, it's doable, but I wasn't exhausted halfway through a race, and I also didn't have people above me and below me, you know, slowing me down or speeding me up, and when my marker finished marking, he was like, dude, that is really, really tough. And so I've always used as my standard to say, I'm never gonna do that again. Never gonna put people through something that hard.
And for people that don't know or weren't there, Challenger was like literally a climb up. There were little tiny chunks where you could walk up, but like a stick would have definitely been helpful.
Yeah.
But there were parts where you were crawling up that darn thing. It was
Yeah, and well, and people said that, you know, when you just sort of went to get a drink out of your pack, you felt like you're going to fall over backwards, and then you took your
yeah.
hands off the ground.
Yeah, don't look back down, because it was like, wow, okay.
Yeah, and pretty cool to see that at the start of the day and the end of the day. At the start of the day, it was all covered in vegetation, and at the end of the weekend, it was a hard beat down path all the way up that. And
Yeah.
The other thing that was tough with that one is the false summits. There were 3 times where you thought, okay, that's all I got to get to, and you get there and think, I'm not even close. And you know, again, afterwards, you can always look back and say, God, that was great. During it, I know that people were grumpy, which
Well,
is
there were a
okay.
lot of people that did the ultra that didn't do more than one lap, because
Oh,
one
sure.
lap was so much for them. And then there
Well,
were
and
the
that's something
few
that I give so much credit to anyone who finished that and said, yeah, I'm going to go do that again. There were a
those
lot
are
of
the
people.
people you want out for sure. But
Well, and
yeah,
there were a lot of people, even people who finished quickly and like could have unquestionably finished it, like beat the cutoff, no problem, just said, I'm just not doing that. So the people who came in right at the cutoff and went back out and did it again anyway, man, oh man, that's whole other level. And you know, even things like, for example, things that we've survived as a team, like as a build team. One year in Red Deer, I think it was 2018, where we had worked our butts off and designed this amazing course and marked this incredible course and put all the obstacles up, and actually went home reasonably early on Friday night. You know, just the idea that we did it. This is great. This is going to be awesome for the racers. And showed up Saturday morning, and somebody came into the park in the night, and they had torn down most of our marking, and they had knocked over all of our water stations and pierced bottles with spears, and they had broken obstacles and stolen bells, and
house.
it was it was
I've never heard of this.
it was so disheartening. And I remember getting there, and I sent all my zone leaders out, you know, the build guys out to check their different zones, and the radio started going off. Hey, Johnny, we got a problem in zone 1. Johnny, I can't even find zone 2. The marking's all down. And yeah, it was devastating. And so, and the racers are all starting to show up, and we mobilized and got everyone working so hard, so fast. And I think we delayed our start only by 45 minutes, and had everything running again and working again. And you know, we were a little careful with rationing water and things like that, because like I say, a lot of it, like people had broken water bottles and thrown the now empty water bottles into the pond. So it must have been a group that was there for half the night wrecking things. And but the again, addressing it head on, I went and I got on the microphone, and I said, hey, we're trying to get you out as quick as we can. I'm going to be very honest with you. What's happened? Told them what had happened, and the racers were very supportive. Came up and said, anything I can do to help, we appreciate you guys. And when we managed to get the race off less than an hour late, people were just so appreciative. And so, you know, sometimes the things that at the time are the worst, like climbing Challenger, or like putting a course back together on Saturday morning after it's all been broken apart, are the things you look back at the most fondly, right? You know, a good life involves lots of struggle and resolution.
Yeah,
You know,
for sure.
every movie we pay to go see involves something going completely shit show in the middle of it, and that's what makes it interesting. And so, as a metaphor for life, whether you're building a Spartan race and overcoming all the challenges it takes to put it on for you, or you're there racing it and surviving something that, you know, halfway through you twist your ankle and think, what am I even doing here? But you limp to the finish line. We all have lots to celebrate. It's pretty neat community to be part of on either end.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I haven't been to a lot of remote locations. I don't drive, so that really narrows it down
Yeah,
a lot. I don't have a lot of money
sure.
to go, but you know, I've
Yeah,
done Spartans in Vegas. I've done them in, you know, I've done them all over the place, and you guys have
yeah,
done a great job in Canada and in the States. There was a couple years at Mount Seymour where like the Canadian Spartan team was just it. You know, like everyone knows, like it went down and then it went back up again
yeah,
when the licensee changed or
yeah,
whatever, and
yeah.
then it moved to Whistler, and that was that was the first year that I believe that was the first year that we got to see the American side of putting on
Sure.
for the and
So one thing
definitely
that I
a
want to
difference.
one thing I want to mention too, because I worked in quality management for a lot of years, and that meant I was working with licensees, trying to get them to toe the line on the standards. And I developed a real appreciation for the licensees and what they're going through, because um, in almost every market other than the US, there were compromises made because you just don't have the breadth and scope of events to recoup your investment. So, you know, in
Yeah,
the States, when they have, you know, 60 to 70 races a year, there's a lot of weekends, there's more than one race going on in the US, or be one in the East, one in the West, right? And so they've really got over the hump of it being a big operation. But if you're in Canada and you're running 7 events a year, or if you're in Slovakia and you're running 4 events a year, it is hard to put on that whole show. And the licensees have actually, for the most part, done a really admirable job of doing the best they can and still putting on something that's safe and awesome, even if they're always playing catch up to the US standard.
yeah,
And Canada, the problem was that it was the proximity would be, you'd go to race in Montana and then come to race in Alberta and go, huh, that's pretty glaring, right? As opposed to if you're doing a race in Italy versus a race in Spain, you know, they were both on that same sort of level. And so the Canadian licensees definitely had their work cut out for them to try and provide the same quality of event. And we've had 3 Canadian licensees in the past. You know, uh, in the East we had one, in the West we had one, and then we had one national one. And I give them all credit for having built the brand, for having done an admirable job of what they did.
yeah,
But it was especially challenging. And ultimately, when it came time to look at the future, back at the end of 2019, Spartan US just made the decision that it just made a lot of sense to rather than sort of rebooting with another licensee and saying, where do we go from here? It's next door. Let's just put these on, especially when they can hire some people like myself and Nick who have the experience, who've worked in the Canadian system, but now have some more resources behind us. It's kind of a win-win. So,
yeah,
and that said, we're now tasked with doing it in the COVID era, which is a little bit different than having everything stacked in our favor. So,
yeah.
so there will be some challenges. There will be some strings we have to pull to make it happen, but it's going to be a great year.
I look forward to it, and I'm sure a lot of other people do as well. You know,
Thanks, my
making
man.
memories and just getting back out there, because you know it's a little tougher, especially for most of us Canadians. Like there's just been a
Yep.
lot less than there has been, and you know I personally look at the States and I'm like, man, they're starting things back up now. I'm
Yeah.
like, you know, I'm getting FOMO, you know, but
Yeah.
now, you know,
Well,
hearing from you, knowing that things are coming down the pipeline and we're going to be starting things back up again with as many of the precautions as needed in place to make sure that both, you know, racers and staff are going to be safe. It
yeah,
means a lot to me for
cool.
sure.
Well, yeah. So the TLDR is, we're coming back. I'm glad you're coming back, and bring volunteers with you. That's the TLDR for this whole interview is we're glad to be back. We're glad you're back. It's going to be better than ever, and we need volunteers.
I can't wait, and I'm sure there's going to be many others that can't as well. So I'm going to make sure I get this out ASAP. We
Cool.
usually release out on the 15th, but this is going to be a special. We're
Cool.
going to get
Awesome.
this out for everybody, and I'll make sure I post it up, and I'll ask other people to post.
Cool.
Just so
Well,
everyone gets the word that Spartan's back.
cool. Hey, in keeping with the times, virtual high five to end, brother. Thanks so much, my man.
Yeah, take care. Have a great day, and hopefully we'll get to see you again on course soon, and maybe even have you back on the show again. So
Our paths will cross for sure, and I'll come back anytime for sure. Thanks, brother.
awesome. Take care.
Take care, man.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the BeastNet Canadian Edition podcast.
Please click on subscribe, like us, and feel free to share the podcast with others.
Give us a review on iTunes or Spotify.
We'd also love to hear from you on who or what type of content you'd love to hear on the show on upcoming episodes.
The BeastNet Canadian Edition podcast is proudly brought to you by
Grit Farm Fitness.
Find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or at beastnetpod.com.
That's beastnetpod.com.